Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that's equal parts painful, poetic, and deeply strange. We're talking about justice, but not the kind you find in modern courtrooms or streaming crime docs. This is Aztec justice, and I promise it's a ride. Now, when most people think of the Aztecs, they picture blood-drenched temples, obsidian knives, maybe a heart being yanked out under a blazing sun. That's not wrong, but it's not the full picture either. Because the Aztec Empire wasn't just about sacrifice and war, it had structure, it had order, it had a legal system. A legal system with rules, judges' appeals, and yesy punishments that could make your spine curl. This wasn't some chaotic do-whatever-you-want kind of society. In fact, the way they enforced laws was so detailed, so brutally specific, that modern societies might seem soft by comparison. So before you settle in, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you actually enjoy this kind of deep, unsettling history. And in the comments, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to see where in the world we're connecting from. Okay, lights dimmed. Maybe a quiet fan humming in the background. Let's begin. So, you've committed a crime in the Aztec Empire. Now, what? Imagine this. You've been caught stealing a basket of maize. Not a huge crime, right? Maybe you were hungry. Maybe it was just sitting there unguarded. In a lot of cultures, you'd get a fine. Maybe a slap on the wrist. But not here. Here, you're about to be judged by a panel of elder priests in public in full ceremonial garb, surrounded by your neighbors. There are no lawyers, no plea deals, just you, the judges, and a very real chance that you'll be beaten, enslaved, or worse. And that's not even the strangest part, because in the Aztec Empire, justice wasn't just about consequences. It was about spectacle. Justice as theater. Aztec justice was like street theater, only the stakes were real. Every punishment was designed to send a message not just to the criminal, but to the entire community. It wasn't enough for you to suffer. You had to be seen suffering. You had to become a walking, breathing cautionary tale. You stole something. You might get painted with black soot, shaved bald, and paraded through the streets in a ridiculous torn tunic. That way, everyone knew what you did. No whisper campaigns. Just visual, unforgettable shame. Aztec punishment was artful, symbolic, and deeply moralistic. Every part of it, the colors, the props, the location, told a story. A red cloth might indicate a serious offense. A cactus whip, nature punishing you on behalf of the gods. You weren't just being punished. You were being transformed into a lesson. The Huihuetl wisdom, not wigs. Now you might be wondering, where were these laws even written down? The Aztecs didn't have law books bound in leather or tucked into shelves, but they did have something called the Huihuetl. Think of it like a legal scroll passed down through generations, a collection of wise sayings, codes, customs, and spiritual guidance. It told people how to live, love, trade, marry, and most importantly, how not to die painfully in public. And enforcing these laws. That was the job of specialized judges, usually elder priests or nobles, who were trained from a young age in the art of judgment. No powdered wigs, no gavels. Just serious stares, a massive memory for rules, and occasionally the authority to decide if you lived or died. And yes, there were appeals, but appealing a case in the Aztec Empire was kind of like challenging a thunderstorm. Technically possible, practically unlikely. No jail time, just immediate consequences. One of the wildest aspects of Aztec justice was the speed. You didn't spend years awaiting trial. There were no long court battles, no Netflix docuseries titled The Trial of Tlacaelel. Your case was heard, and if you were guilty, the punishment happened fast. sometimes within hours. Because Aztecs believed that delayed justice weakened its meaning. The point wasn't to draw it out. The point was to make it stick. And here's the twist, there were no prisons. None. If you committed a crime, you weren't locked away behind iron bars to wait it out. You were punished in the open, humiliated, enslaved, or executed, and then sent right back into society. Or, not depending on how bad your offense was. You either learned your lesson, or you became a warning. Different rules for different classes, but not everyone was treated the same. In fact, one of the most fascinating and maybe most shocking parts of Aztec justice was how it treated social class. If you were a commoner and committed a crime, you might be flogged or fined. If you were a noble, you could lose everything: your land, your title, maybe even your head. That's right. Nobles were held to higher standards, and their punishments were often harsher. Because in the Aztec worldview, power came with responsibility. If you abused it, you didn't just fail as a person, you failed as a symbol. And symbols mattered. The justice system begins at home, with chili smoke. Now let's shift gears. You might be thinking, okay, but how did this society raise people to respect these laws? Welcome to Aztec parenting. In a lot of cultures, kids get timeouts, maybe a stern lecture. In the Aztec Empire, they got chili smoke. That's not a metaphor. If a child disobeyed, talked back, skipped chores, disrespected an elder, they could be placed in a small room or hut while chilies were burned on hot coals. The resulting smoke would sting their eyes, burn their throats, and overwhelm their senses. A kind of spiritual pepper spray for toddlers. But here's the thing, they weren't physically harmed. Not really. It was shame-based sensory punishment. You didn't forget your first chili sauna, and that was the goal. And it didn't stop there. Some kids were pricked with cactus spines. Others forced to sweep public temples or carry bundles of firewood too heavy for their size. Discipline wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. It was correction, a sacred duty to raise strong, obedient, responsible citizens. And yes, even noble children were subjected to these punishments, sometimes even more strictly than commoners. Because in Aztec society, privilege never meant freedom from discipline. It meant more eyes were on you. Stealing, 3 strikes, you're skinned. Now, let's talk about theft. In the Aztec world, stealing wasn't just bad manners, it was spiritual pollution. A stolen item, whether it was corn cloth or firewood, didn't just offend the person you took it from. It offended the gods, especially if it disrupted the cosmic balance. So, the punishments escalated fast. First offense, public shame, maybe a few lashes, maybe a humiliating haircut. Second offense, enslavement. You'd be handed over to the person you stole from, forced to work off your debt. Day in, day out, no dignity, no freedom. Third offense, you got flayed. That means skinned. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally. Your skin would be removed slowly, painfully, often in front of a crowd. And in certain rituals, a priest might wear your skin not as a trophy, but as a religious act of rebirth tied to the earth goddess. It wasn't just about pain, it was about symbolism. The skin represented identity. Removing it was like removing your place in the universe. Harsh, absolutely, but that was the point. You stole once you were warned. You stole twice you were worked. You stole 3 times you were unmade. Part 2. Love, Laziness, and the Law. Aztec crimes you never knew could get you killed. So, you've heard what happens when you steal in the Aztec Empire. Let's just say, it doesn't end in a slap on the wrist. But stealing wasn't the only way to meet a brutal end. There were other crimes too. Some of them you wouldn't expect. Let's start with something a bit more personal. Adultery was a crime and it didn't end in divorce court. In the Aztec Empire, marriage wasn't just a romantic arrangement. It was sacred. It was spiritual. It was strategic. Marriage connected families, cemented alliances, and kept social order intact. And if you stepped outside that bond, if you cheated, well, that wasn't just a betrayal. It was a cosmic offense, an insult to the gods, the community, and the very structure of society. So, what happened if you committed adultery? You didn't go to therapy. You didn't file for divorce. You were killed, publicly, with no subtlety whatsoever. Let's say a man was caught with another man's wife. The husband had options, and none of them involved forgiveness, the most common punishment: execution by blunt force trauma. Yep, you'd be beaten with a stone club. The Aztecs had a specific weapon for this, the macuahuitl. It was usually a wooden sword lined with obsidian blades, but in this case they used the blunt version. If you were lucky, it was quick, but often it wasn't. And women, they weren't spared either. If a woman was caught cheating, the punishment was just as brutal: death by strangulation, stoning, or being thrown off a cliff. Which method depended on the region and the social status of the people involved. And nobles, oh, nobles got it worse. Because if a noble cheated, it wasn't just messy. It could jeopardize inheritance, property, even royal bloodlines. So, the punishment had to be dramatic enough to prevent a full-on dynastic collapse. Now here's the kicker. If you falsely accused someone of adultery, that was a death sentence too. Lying wasn't tolerated. You could start a chain reaction that ended in an execution. So if you accused someone without proof, the law turned on you fast. Cut down a tree. Cut off your future. Now this next one might sound silly until it happens to you. Imagine you need firewood. It's getting cold. You see a tree, beautiful, shady, leafy. You grab your axe, chop, chop. Bad move. You just chopped down a sacred tree. And in the Aztec Empire, some trees weren't just wood. They were spiritual beings. They symbolized ancestors, gods, even the cosmic balance itself. And if you harmed one, say goodbye to your dignity and possibly your home. First-time offenders might be beaten with cactus spines or thorny branches, nature punishing you with itself. You'd also have to pay restitution, maybe with labor goods or land. In some cases, your house could be burned down as a symbolic act of balance. You took life from the gods take shelter from you. And it didn't stop there. You could be paraded through the city with villagers throwing pebbles, shouting curses, making sure everyone knew this is the fool who offended the god's garden. Do it again. You might be enslaved, because if you couldn't respect nature's roots, the empire decided you didn't deserve roots of your own. Teenage drinking, not just a bad look, a death sentence. Now, let's say you're a teen in the Aztec Empire. You're rebellious. You sneak a drink at a festival. It's called pulque, a fermented sap drink made from the maguey plant. Tastes sweet, smells like ceremony. You think you're cool, until someone sees you. In most modern places, you'd get grounded. Maybe a bad hangover and an awkward dinner with your parents. In the Aztec Empire, you could be executed. And I don't mean scared straight execution. I mean publicly strangled or beaten to death. Why? Because pulque wasn't a party drink. It was sacred, reserved for elders, priests, and warriors, people who had earned their place through sacrifice, battle, or age. If you were young and drunk, you weren't just breaking the rules. You were corrupting yourself, polluting your soul. A first offense might earn you a shame parade. Your head shaved, your clothes stripped, your dignity gone. You'd be marched through town while people insulted you. But if you did it again and they caught you, you died. Even noble youth didn't get a pass. In fact, their punishment could be worse. A noble caught drinking might be ritually humiliated in the royal court, stripped of title, and sent to a distant temple to be re-educated. Drinking wasn't fun. It was a privilege. And if you weren't wise enough to handle it, the empire handled you. The price of laziness. Get to work or get dragged. Now let's talk about something a lot of us have been guilty of: laziness. In the Aztec world, idleness wasn't just a personal flaw, it was a spiritual disease, a moral rot, something that offended not just your neighbors, but the gods. Work was sacred. Everyone had a role: farmers, weavers, warriors, priests. And if you didn't pull your weight, you weren't just a slacker. You were a threat to the cosmic balance. So, what happened? First offense, public humiliation. Your head shaved, your clothes replaced with rags. You might be forced to carry rotten firewood around the market while people shouted, "Behold the man who does nothing." Repeat offenses, beatings, tied to a post, public mockery. Possibly sold into temporary slavery, not forever, just long enough to remind you that purpose is not optional. Even noble sons weren't spared. A noble who skipped training could be sent to a youth correction center. Sounds tame until you realize that correction included cactus beatings and military-style drills with no mercy. Laziness among women was punished too. Aztec women had clearly defined duties: grinding maize, weaving, raising children, maintaining the household. And if a woman neglected her duties repeatedly, she could be publicly scolded, shamed, or stripped of social standing. Because in Aztec society, to do nothing was to betray everything. The marketplace had rules, and they were ruthless. Let's head to the market, the tianguis. This was the beating heart of Aztec urban life. Spices, fabrics, jade, tamales, feathers. Everything was for sale. But honesty. That wasn't negotiable. If you sold fake goods, spoiled food, or tampered with prices, you weren't just scamming customers. You were insulting the gods of trade and agriculture. Market inspectors called Postakatlatok patrolled the stalls, listening for complaints, checking weights, sniffing for lies. Caught cheating once, your stall might be flipped, your goods ruined, your hands tied. Everyone would watch. Caught again. You could be fined, flogged, or banished from the market, a kind of economic death sentence. Repeat offense, branding, slavery, or execution if your scam caused real harm, especially if your customer was noble or sick. Selling fake medicine, for instance, that could get you killed. And the market judges would make sure your death was as public as your deceit. Because in the Aztec Empire, trust wasn't just a virtue, it was infrastructure. Break it and the whole society cracked. The sin of the false tongue, lying could kill you. Now here's where things get especially intense. In Aztec courtrooms, your word mattered. There were no CCTV cameras, no DNA evidence, just witnesses' memory and testimony. So, if you lied in court, in public, in official matters, that wasn't just perjury, it was sacrilege. False witnesses could be executed, strangled, beaten, stoned, depending on how serious the lie was and what harm it caused. If your lie sent someone innocent to punishment, the empire made sure you suffered exactly what they did. And even lesser lies weren't ignored. You might be paraded through the streets with your face painted black, the color of deceit, and a sign hung around your neck. This one talks too much and says too little truth. Lying was dangerous because the Aztec Empire didn't believe in loopholes. They believed in moral clarity. And if your tongue betrayed society, society cut it off figuratively and sometimes literally. You got caught again. You're not just guilty, you're done. The Aztecs weren't completely heartless. They believed in second chances, just not very many. First-time offender. You might get a warning, a fine, a bit of chili smoke. Second time, things escalate. Servitude, public humiliation, property confiscation. Third time. That's it. The Empire had seen enough. You weren't just punished, you were erased, sometimes physically, sometimes spiritually. They called it unpersoning. You could lose all legal protections. That meant anyone could shame you, enslave you, even harm you, and no one would lift a finger to defend you. You became a ghost in your own city, not exiled, not jailed, just erased. Because in the Aztec worldview, the problem wasn't that you failed once or twice. The problem was that you refused to learn. And in a society built on divine balance and social duty that made you a threat the Empire was not afraid to eliminate. Part 3. Theater of Justice. Why the Aztecs turned punishment into a public performance. Alright, so by now you get the idea. Aztec justice wasn't about long-term jail sentences or quiet resolutions. It was bold, it was fast, it was unforgettable. But let's zoom in on something truly unique, the performance of justice. Because in the Aztec Empire, punishment wasn't just about the law, it was about the message. Imagine a society where every mistake, every crime, every act of defiance wasn't just punished, it was performed. Like a play. Like a living billboard. The courtroom wasn't 4 walls and a bench. It was the public square. The punishment wasn't a sentence in a file. It was a ritual, one meant to be seen, felt, and remembered by everyone. Let's talk about what that looked like. Public pain was the point. In most modern justice systems, punishment is private. Courtrooms are quiet. Prison doors close. Consequences are hidden behind walls. The Aztecs didn't do that. They believed punishment only worked if people witnessed it. The plaza, the market, the steps of a temple, these were their stages. And if you broke the law, you weren't led away in chains. You were shave-painted bound and dragged into the middle of town. People gathered, kids stared, neighbors whispered. And when the punishment began, whether it was a flogging, a forced labor task, or an execution, the message landed like thunder. It wasn't just about you. It was about the person standing nearby thinking I was gonna steal some maize. But maybe not. Shame was a weapon. Let's say you're a lazy worker. You ignore your duties, skip your shifts. The judges don't quietly fine you. No. You're marched through the city wearing rotting clothes with a sign hanging around your neck that basically says, I contribute nothing. People heckle. They throw maize husks. They point. Or maybe you lied in court. You're not thrown in jail. You're painted black, the symbolic color of deceit, and paraded with a charcoal mouth, a visual marker of your dishonesty. It doesn't wash off quickly, and the stain becomes your new identity. These weren't random acts of cruelty. They were rituals, designed not to destroy you, but to change you. Or, if needed, replace you with a walking warning. Children got it, too, just differently. Even children weren't spared from public correction. In Aztec homes, discipline started young, and if a child misbehaved often or seriously, the family could escalate it right into the public square. Kids might be forced to carry bundles of firewood bigger than themselves across the market, barefoot, everyone watching. Sometimes they swept temple steps all day while being shamed by passing elders. The goal wasn't humiliation for fun, it was community correction. Everyone had a role to play in restoring balance. Even young offenders were taught that a mistake wasn't just their problem. It rippled out across the street, the neighborhood, the empire. Adulterers, liars, and thieves all center stage. Let's go back to some of the harsher offenses. Adulterers stoned, strangled, or bludgeoned in front of everyone. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about upholding order. Thieves, especially repeat offenders, were skinned alive. Not in some hidden prison, not at midnight. Right there in the plaza where the offense occurred, ritualized, witnessed, etched into the collective memory. Even executions were ceremonies. If a man was to be flayed, he wasn't just punished. His body became part of a religious performance. His skin might be worn by a priest for a few sacred hours, symbolizing rebirth punishment and the cycle of cosmic balance. It sounds horrifying because it was. That was the point. The Aztecs understood something many modern societies try to avoid. Pain fades. Public memory doesn't. The plaza as classroom. You might think, why such a spectacle? Why not keep things more discreet? Because the Aztecs believed in preventative punishment. If everyone saw what happened to you, maybe they wouldn't make the same mistake. That's why they didn't need prisons. There was no need to lock people away for years. Why remove them when you could turn them into a lesson? The punishment didn't end when the pain stopped. It lived on in gossip songs and memory. Kids would whisper, "Did you see what happened to the guy who lied in court last week?" And suddenly lying felt like a really bad idea. The entire legal system was built not on retribution, but reinforcement. Do something wrong and society doesn't just fix it. It remembers it. No prisons, just proof. Let's pause here and think about this. The Aztec Empire had no prison system. Let me say that again. No prisons. No concrete buildings. No long sentences. No parole hearings. Why? Because they didn't believe in storing problems. They believed in solving them. Quickly, publicly, permanently. If you were correctable, you were corrected. If you were dangerous, you were destroyed. If you were persistent, you were erased. And if you were none of those things, if you just messed up, once the system gave you a chance to learn fast. It was brutal, yes, but in a society that had no space, no surplus, and no margin for error, it worked. Social order was enforced not with steel bars, but with collective memory. Even symbols had purpose. Now here's something really interesting. The Aztecs didn't just use acts of punishment. They used symbols to reinforce them. Colors meant things. Red paint might signify a serious crime. Stripes or dots on your body could represent the type of offense. Hair mattered too. Shaved head symbolized shame, failure, or loss of status. Even your clothes torn oversized or dyed with ash became wearable reminders that you broke the law. Every element of your punishment was visible, because justice wasn't about hiding what went wrong. It was about broadcasting it. You weren't just guilty. You were now the poster child for what happens when society is defied. Noble offenders fell harder. And if you thought being rich or noble made you immune, think again. Noble children, if caught drinking or being lazy, could be forced to wear commoner clothes and sweep temples all day, a symbolic fall from grace. A prince scrubbing floors, that image did more than punish him. It reminded everyone else that no one was above the law. In fact, nobles were often punished more harshly because their actions had bigger consequences. Their downfall was a message: power is not protection. If you broke the rules, the empire made sure everyone saw what happened next. Justice as morality, not bureaucracy. Here's what separates Aztec justice from modern systems. It wasn't built around laws and loopholes. It wasn't about clever arguments or technicalities. It was about morality. Right was right, wrong was wrong. And the punishment was tailored not to rehabilitate you in secret, but to warn others in public. The idea wasn't let's fix this person. It was let's prevent this from happening again. And in a society where cosmic balance was everything, where the gods depended on human order, justice wasn't just about society. It was about survival. When justice becomes a story, in a way every punishment became a parable. The thief who lost his skin, the drunk teen who vanished, the liar with the black-stained mouth. They all became characters in a cautionary tale passed from neighbor to neighbor. A kind of folklore, except it had actually happened. Last week, right over there, You saw it. And the message, remember, always remember, that was the real sentence, not the pain, not the shame, not even the death. The sentence was story. Your legacy became a warning. And in that way, Aztec punishment outlived the body. It echoed, it lingered, it taught. Part 4. No cells, no chains. How the Aztecs kept order without prisons. So far we've talked about how the Aztecs turned justice into street theater, visible, unforgettable, moral, and fast. But one of the biggest shocks in all of this, they didn't have prisons. Seriously, no concrete boxes, no overcrowded facilities, no years of waiting for parole. Why? Because in the Aztec Empire, punishment wasn't about removing people. It was about reminding them and everyone else exactly what they did. Let's break this down. What did it actually look like to have a society without prisons, and how did it still function? The holding cell was the plaza. There were temporary spaces to hold people, sure. Tiny chambers where accused criminals might wait for a judgment or ritual. But these weren't jails. These were waiting rooms for consequence. You weren't there to reflect. You weren't there to be reformed. You were there for the public to get ready to watch what came next. Some of these cells were built near temples or administrative areas and guarded by warriors. They were sparse, symbolic, and always transitional. The sentence didn't happen in the dark. It happened under the sun. Because the plaza, the marketplace, the temple courtyard, that was the real court. And when your name was called, you weren't called forward. You were dragged forward. Why the Aztecs didn't need prisons. In modern systems, prison is a place where time is the punishment. You sit, you wait. The days pass. And in theory, you reflect. But to the Aztecs, time wasn't the consequence. Memory was. They didn't want you hidden away behind walls. They wanted you visible. They wanted your neighbors to walk past you and remember exactly what you did. They wanted the smell of your punishment, the sound of your screams, the marks on your skin to live in people's minds. That's how they prevented crime. Fear wasn't abstract. It was physical. You saw what happened. You smelled it. You walked past it on the way to buy tortillas. That's the power of public consequence. The emperor as final judge. But let's go higher up. Say you've been convicted of something serious. You think your punishment is too severe. You've got one last shot. You appeal. And yes, there was an appeal system even in the Aztec Empire. Judgments could be reviewed by higher courts. And in rare cases, your case might even go to the top, to the emperor himself. Now, this wasn't a guarantee of mercy. Quite the opposite. Because if the emperor agreed with your punishment, there was no more discussion. And if he didn't, well, congratulations. You still weren't walking away scot-free. Your punishment might change form, maybe from death to slavery, but you were still paying the price. Appealing in the Aztec system wasn't about technicalities or clever lawyers. It was about presenting your case to someone who might see into your soul. And if they didn't like what they saw, the gods got their due. 3 strikes and you're gone. Remember how we mentioned earlier that the Aztecs believed in second chances. Let's talk about what happened after that. If you committed a crime, once you might get a symbolic punishment, shaving your head, carrying logs, a day of temple sweeping. Strike 2. That's when it got real. Enslavement, public humiliation, fines that took your land, your goods, your future. Strike 3. You weren't just punished. You were unpersoned. That meant your legal protections were stripped. You had no rights. Anyone could insult you, beat you, even enslave you, and no one would come to your defense. The government wouldn't help. Your family wouldn't dare. You were spiritually erased. And in a society that valued cosmic balance, that meant you were now outside the balance. A walking ghost. And soon enough, not walking at all. Punishment as costume. Let's talk symbols again. We have already said that shaved heads, soot paint, and torn clothes all carried meaning. But the Aztecs didn't stop there. They used your entire body as a message board. If you were caught lying in court, your lips might be stained with black charcoal, the color of deception. If you stole, your hands might be bound in dyed cords, then paraded in front of market stalls, the very ones you'd taken from. Repeat offenses could earn you a branded mark, a permanent reminder etched into your skin. The colors, the symbols, the costumes all worked together to make you the warning. You weren't a person anymore. You were a story people would tell, a walking, breathing cautionary tale. And for the Aztecs, that was justice done right. When execution wasn't enough, it had to be poetic. Now we need to talk about how even execution wasn't always about efficiency. In many cases, it was artistic. Take the example of a man who stole sacred temple offerings. He wasn't just killed. He was paraded in ash-stained robes, painted in symbolic colors, bound in cords made from temple fabric, and executed at the base of the temple steps where the offense happened. Each step was part of a ritual, not just punishment, but ritual restoration. It wasn't vengeance, it was balance. And once it was done, the community could breathe again. The world had been set right. Execution with a moral. Some methods were designed not just to kill, but to warn. Strangulation was slow, public, deliberate. Bludgeoning was brutal, but symbolic. It signaled dishonor, especially for nobles. Throwing someone off a cliff, that wasn't just about the fall. It was about removal, a way to show that a person had fallen for grace literally. Even flaying wasn't random cruelty. The removal of skin represented the removal of identity. Your outer layer, your face, your role, your pride stripped away. Recycled in a ritual worn by a priest who now carried your symbolic burden. You didn't die for fun. You died for meaning. And that meaning stuck. How justice shaped memory. Here's what really made Aztec justice powerful. It lived on. Not in stone tablets, not in scrolls, but in memory. A child grows up watching a thief lose his skin in the market square. He never steals. A woman recalls the teenage drunk who vanished after being paraded in shame. Her son never drinks. A vendor remembers the seller who cheated a noble with spoiled fruit. He never tampers with his scales. The lessons were brutal, but they worked. Because Aztec justice wasn't about fear alone. It was about storytelling. The empire knew that if people remembered, they wouldn't repeat. Symbols never die, they echo. And that's the real genius of the Aztec system. No prisons, no hidden punishments, no drawn-out trials. Instead, you got speed, spectacle, symbolism, story. You didn't just punish someone. You transformed them from a person into a message. And in a world where cosmic balance mattered more than comfort, that was the ultimate form of justice. You weren't just stopping crime. You were rewriting memory. Part 5, Cram Color and Cosmic Order, the spiritual theater of Aztec justice. By now we've traveled through the heart of Aztec justice, the swift punishments, the symbolic humiliation, the complete lack of jails, and how memory was more powerful than imprisonment. But there's still something deeper going on here. Something that takes Aztec justice from brutal effectiveness to something almost poetic, something mythic. Because in the Aztec world, justice wasn't just about law and order. It was about balance, spiritual, social, cosmic. Let's talk about how every part of Aztec justice, from the colors they painted you in to the tools they used to beat you, was rooted in a belief system that wove punishment into the fabric of the universe. Black, red, white justice in living color. The Aztecs didn't just punish with whips and clubs. They punished with symbolism, and color was one of their sharpest tools. Let's start with black. A man convicted of lying in court might not lose his tongue, but his face painted entirely black, his lips stained with charcoal. That way everyone knew what came out of his mouth couldn't be trusted. You didn't need a criminal record. You wore your crime. Red, on the other hand, often marked high-level offenses, not quite capital, but serious enough to earn you public scrutiny. Think of red as a visual siren. This person has done something that touched sacred boundaries. White clothing, usually a symbol of purity or ritual cleanliness, could be denied to you as punishment. You might be forced into dirty rags or oversized robes that didn't match your rank. You weren't just being corrected. You were being visibly downgraded. Tools of judgment. Nothing was random. Even the items used in punishment had meaning. If you were beaten with cactus spines, that wasn't just a hurt. That was nature turning on you. A poetic reminder that your behavior had disrupted the harmony of life itself. Rope bindings made from specific plants or temple cloths weren't arbitrary. They were chosen for their sacred connections materials that meant something, wrapping your body in the very fabric of divine expectation. Even how you were tied mattered. Certain knots, arm positions, or leg placements symbolized different types of shame or moral violation. You weren't just bound. You were presented. Punishment as pageant. You weren't led to punishment in silence. You were paraded. And it mattered how you were seen. A thief might walk through the market with ash on his face, his hands tied and produced like tamales or maize hung around his neck, like the items themselves were condemning him. A child who disobeyed parents might sweep a temple floor with a giant broom he could barely hold, not to clean it, but to be seen trying, sweating, failing. Even the setting mattered. If you offended the gods in a temple, you weren't punished at home. You were punished on the temple steps in the same place where the offense occurred. Every act of justice was staged, not for drama, for meaning. Sacred trees, sacred rules. Now imagine this: you're cold. You need firewood. You cut down a tree. Big mistake. Because some trees weren't just plants. They were symbols. Planted near temples, marketplaces, or crossroads, they represented life, continuity, ancestral roots, or divine favor. Cutting down the wrong one was like slapping the face of a god. You didn't just hurt the landscape, you offended the cosmos. The punishment, beaten with thorny branches, nature fighting back, forced to offer tribute or give up land, maybe even publicly ridiculed, your house burned, your family shamed. And if you were a repeat offender, you were enslaved, stripped of your roots. Because if you couldn't respect the roots of the world, you didn't deserve to grow in it. Laziness as a spiritual crime. Let's revisit something seemingly small: laziness. In most places, it's seen as a personality flaw. Maybe you get fired, maybe you get nagged. But in the Aztec Empire, laziness was cosmic disorder. The gods didn't create the world so you could sit around. The rains didn't fall so you could skip planting. Your ancestors didn't fight and bleed so you could nap on temple steps. If you failed to contribute at home, in the market, in the military, you weren't just useless. You were a threat. And the empire made sure you didn't forget that. The public shame, the bizarre costumes, the rotten cloaks, all visual prayers for balance played out in the theater of the street. No guards, just memory. What's wild is this Aztec justice worked without surveillance, without guards, without walls. Why? Because the community was the enforcer. You didn't need a parole officer when your neighbor was the one who saw you get painted black for lying. You didn't need a criminal record when every vendor in the market knew you once sold rotten chili powder and got whipped for it. The weight of memory, your family's memory, your society's memory, was the cage. And in that cage, people learned. Children were corrected, not broken. Let's return to kids for a moment. We mentioned the chili smoke punishment. A child placed in a small hut while burning peppers filled the air with tear-inducing smoke, an unforgettable lesson in obedience. But here's the nuance: the child wasn't beaten senseless. He wasn't crippled or killed. The goal wasn't destruction. It was conditioning. It was theater for them too. You didn't have to ruin someone to reform them. You just had to make the lesson unforgettable. And the Aztecs understood human memory like few ancient civilizations did. Execution meant, you were beyond repair. So, what pushed someone past the point of redemption? Simple repetition without repentance. The first time you stole a warning. The second time, servitude. The third time, skinning. Because now you weren't someone who made a mistake. You were someone who could not learn. And in Aztec belief, a person who couldn't learn was a person who no longer belonged in society. You weren't just punished. You were removed from the balance. Your body became a symbol, a transformation, a warning, a ritual, a memory. From law to legend, here's what makes Aztec justice different from nearly every other ancient system. It wasn't obsessed with bureaucracy. It wasn't bogged down in forms and papers. It was alive. It lived in plazas, in pigments, in footsteps, in whispers. It breathed through color, costume, and ceremony. It wasn't written down in scrolls that gathered dust. It was told, retold, remembered. A grandmother warning a child not to steal because she saw what happened to a boy last year. A marketplace vendor still checking weights religiously because once she watched someone get branded for lying about obsidian. These weren't just punishments. They were myths in real time. And they worked. Still waters, still warnings. Today the Aztec Empire is long gone. The pyramids still rise. The calendars still baffle. The legacy is still studied. But the justice, that still whispers. Because even in our modern world, there's something magnetic about a system that fused punishment with performance law, with symbolism, shame with spirituality. In a place with no prisons, the sentence wasn't behind bars. The sentence was remembering what you saw. The man with the soot-stained face. The child sweeping the temple stairs. The thief who disappeared, but whose absence everyone remembers. Aztec justice didn't just teach lessons. It became them. Part 6. Echoes of Justice. What the Aztecs still teach us about crime, memory, and society. So, we've walked the plazas. We've watched the punishments. We've smelled the smoke, felt the weight of shame, heard the crowd silence during a public execution. And now we stand at the edge of it all looking back. What do we make of it? Was the Aztec justice system brutal? Yes. Unforgiving? Absolutely. But beneath the lashes and the floggings and the ritualized shame was something else. Something deeper. Something hauntingly effective. It wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was about order and memory. And it leaves us with a question that feels just as relevant now as it did 500 years ago. What kind of justice actually works? Modern justice versus Aztec. Justice, a tale of two worlds. Today, most legal systems in the modern world rely on a few key ideas. You commit a crime. You go to court. You get sentenced. You go to prison or pay a fine. You serve time. You're rehabilitated. In theory, but prisons don't guarantee redemption. And shame in most cases is private, hidden behind walls, forgotten by everyone except the person serving the sentence. The Aztecs flipped that logic on its head. They said, why lock someone away? Why forget? Punishment should be seen. Justice should be felt. And every action should ripple through the entire society. It wasn't about hiding criminals. It was about confronting everyone with what happens when balance is broken. And while that might sound harsh or even inhumane, it carried one undeniable power. People remembered. They didn't need warning labels. They had living warnings. Justice as a moral mirror. Aztec justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about reflection. When someone was punished, the thief, the liar, the slacker, it wasn't just for them. It was a mirror held up to everyone watching. It asked, "Could this be you?" And the people watching, the vendors, the elders, the children, didn't walk away thinking, "Glad that's over." They walked away thinking, "I won't make that mistake." Fear was part of it, yes, but so was community. So was a shared belief in cosmic balance. Because in Aztec, belief justice wasn't just about humans. It was about the gods, about the land, about harmony between heaven and earth. Every lie, every theft, every act of laziness, it wasn't just social disobedience. It was spiritual imbalance. And it had to be corrected not just with punishment, but with meaning. Lessons we still feel today. Now you might ask, what does any of this have to do with us? We live in cities with courtrooms, jails, digital records, security cameras. Nobody gets painted black and marched through the streets anymore. So, what can we learn from an empire that flayed repeat offenders and humiliated liars with soot? Actually, a lot, because Aztec justice teaches us three major things. 1, memory is more powerful than law. You can sign a contract, print a law, build a jail. But if people don't remember what justice looks like or why it matters, the law becomes just ink on a page. The Aztecs understood that pain fades but stories endure. A single public punishment could prevent 100 future crimes not because of force, but because of fear and understanding. And sometimes understanding is a more permanent enforcer than any guard. 2, symbolism matters. Modern punishments often miss the mark because they don't mean anything. A fine doesn't teach integrity. A prison sentence doesn't always inspire self-reflection. But the Aztecs, they turned every punishment into a message. They knew that humans respond to symbols, to rituals, to visual reminders of what's at stake. A blackened mouth, a shaved head, a boy carrying firewood in shame. Those images stayed burned in the minds of everyone who saw them. Because justice wasn't just delivered, it was performed. 3, community enforces values better than any institution. In the Aztec world, everyone watched, everyone judged, everyone remembered. And while that sounds terrifying, it also meant something beautiful. Justice wasn't a job, it was a community responsibility. You didn't rely on an anonymous system to protect your neighborhood. You were the system. Your voice mattered. Your memory mattered. Your presence in the plaza meant the law had witnesses, and that meant it had weight. The strange comfort of harsh clarity. There's a strange comfort in how clear-cut Aztec justice was. No plea deals, no loopholes, no hiding behind lawyers or bureaucracy. You stole, there's the punishment. You lied, face the people you lied to. You refused to change, you're removed. It wasn't democratic, it wasn't merciful, but it was clear. And in a chaotic world, clarity can feel like safety. Because at least everyone knew the rules. The cost of forgetting. Here's the haunting truth. We don't remember most modern punishments. We barely remember most modern crimes. But we remember the Aztecs. We remember the painted faces, the temple parades, the firewood boys, the skinned thieves. And that memory, even 500 years later, still teaches us something. That justice isn't just about punishment. It's about performance, memory, and meaning. Final thoughts when law becomes legend. So what are we left with? An empire that ruled without prisons. A people who judged without hesitation. A justice system that worked not because it was kind, but because it was unforgettable. It was savage, yes, but it was also smart. It spoke in colors, in costumes, in crowds. It made every sentence a spectacle, every punishment a parable, every criminal a character in a moral story, that society couldn't ignore. Aztec justice didn't just punish people. It became a myth. And in doing so, it did something even modern systems struggle to achieve. It made justice unforgettable. Hey guys, if you made it this far, thank you. I know this episode was intense, but hopefully it opened your eyes to a part of history we rarely explore. Let me know in the comments what surprised you the most about Aztec justice. Would you rather live in a system like theirs, fast, symbolic, visible, or the modern system we have today? And if you learned something, give the video a like and share it with someone who loves weird, dark, brilliant slices of history. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and never forget. The past isn't dead. It's just waiting for you to look closer. Our story ends here. See you tomorrow evening. Good night. I love you.